The real ninja were absolutely hardcore. They pushed the boundaries of, like, we have special forces today, but they're still sort of bound by rules and restrictions. Back in the day, these guys were lethal. These guys were the ones who went right into enemy territory. We're talking about, I've tried to explain this to people before, it's the equivalent of going into a war-torn country, or a country that's run by a cartel, and you have to disguise yourself as one of those, get into the enemy, get close to the enemy, get into their fortress, and then burn it down, and then escape with your life. Or, like you get today, deep spies who are deep inside of enemy territory. Like we've just seen the Russian one, the guy who got poisoned recently. It's the same type of thing. You're way behind enemy lines and you're in a really dangerous position. And actually the word shinobi, ninja, means endurance and stealth. So the idea here is that the ninja are based on the ideogram for heart with a blade, and you've got an iron heart, and that you are so far inside of fear that you've got to be able to put a countenance on, an external illusion, to get rid of that fear and work and blend in with the enemy. The skills, to be honest, the most difficult one is the chemistry, I suppose, because they do a lot of explosives and they have to deal with a lot of chemistry, and there's a lot of nature, so they will deal with poisons and beetles and anything that will, arsenic, and everybody assumes it's stealth, moving in and out, but actually most of it is the idea of seeing the nature or the true nature of people. And it's got to be constant observation, and it's more a mental aspect. So a shinobi is moving in and out of the enemy. They are in their own territory, but they're constantly observing. And one idea of the shinobi, one sort of mental picture, is that you get a pond, a vast pond, and you step back and you wait and you watch society. And in this pond, a fish will break the surface and it'll cause ripples that'll go out. And for a ninja, that's the new information. So, and what they do then is analyze it, put it all together and check it. And they have to create this massive, complex understanding of the enemy and the world around them, inside of also being in disguise, while entering into a dialect and a language that's not their own. And then in the middle of all that, they may have to wait for a moonless night, creep into a house, and then use that information and strike the target, and then use a disguise to get all the way out and back across, back to their own side.
So they're like kind of commandos.
Right, in ninja lore, there's a place called Iga and there's a place called Koka, and these guys are absolutely famous. They are the top brass. They're the best in all of Japan, and everybody in Japan agrees with that. However, they are samurai cities. They're independent run samurai cities in the 1500s, and they are collections of clans and families, samurai clans and families. And for some reason, they became experts at the arts of the ninja. And these guys were top class, and they didn't hate each other. One of the myths is that they hated each other and they fought each other. That's not true. However, they did at times fight different families versus different families. However, the Iga people say they're better than Koka, and the Koka people say they're better than Iga. But one of the main differences that seems to come about is that the Koka people tend to be more esoteric and magical. They believe in the gods. They believe in that the gods will hide their form. So, for example, one of the spells inside of it is to get a selection of arrows and you point them all inwards, and then you chant a spell and you take a mirror and you place the mirror over the arrows and then cover it with leaves. And the idea is that the ninja's form will be hidden inside of the leaves when they go off and infiltrate the enemy. Whereas Iga are based on lots of tools, and the tools will get them through it. That is of course a generalization, but both, well, historical documentation says that both Iga and Koka work like that. I don't think their magic was, sorry. I don't think their magic was for effect, to be honest, because nobody ever saw it. The idea was that you didn't actually see it. So it was done before a mission, it was done before, and it is of course based, Japan, you can't take the ninja out of Japan. So first of all, you've got Japan, then you've got the samurai, and then you've got religion, and then inside of that you've got the ninja working inside. So they've got Buddhist, they've got Shinto, they've got Confucianism, and they've also got Onmyodo, which is a form of yin-yang, you know, or Taoist theory. So yeah, get all of this crammed in together and they mix it up, and lots of different bits of magic come out. But on the whole, it 100%, I think, is they believe it will work, they will believe it will help them, and it is. You can go to tribal countries all over the world and it's very, very similar. People think of the samurais and the ninja as very further on, or you're like very developed. But we've got this idea from the late samurai period. When you go back quite early, it's a headhunting culture. They're absolutely into ritual magic. They're, without a doubt, we're back in the 1500s here. So yes, they believe the power will be given to them from the gods. So they deal with people like, deities like Marashiten and then Kanon, and they ask them to hide them. They say, please give me invisibility. One of the famous ones is the Kuji ritual, which is Rinpyoto Shakaijin Retsuzai Zen Aun. And the idea of that is when you go into a situation, it builds like a matrix, if you like, and you then put a 10th character on it. And so, for example, if you write dragon over it, it gives you protection in water. So none of this was actually shown to the enemy. In fact, even today I go and study in Japan, and one of the Buddhist monks, they do everything under there, you know, under the robes. Like what he says, he's a Zen monk, and he says, we don't have magic rituals with Zen. I'm like, apart from this, he does it all again. So definitely the magic is there, but I think they believe it. However, lastly, they do also say sometimes the magic is there to help ninjas, give them patience. So one is you get a frog and you put the ink in it and you write the name of the enemy on the frog, and then you throw the frog over the fence and then you wait, and when the frog comes out, the enemy will come out. And the annotations to this scroll, which is from the 1670s, said this is not actual magic, it just stops impatient ninja running in and they're waiting for a frog. So he says when they get bored of waiting for the frog, they'll go in. So the idea is that by that time they've fell asleep inside the house and they can creep in. This question comes up quite a lot, and to be honest, there's only one answer. Well, there's one answer with a secondary, and first of all is don't do it. It's totally illegal. It's absolutely illegal. The way of the ninja, you know. So I say to people, they say, I want to be a ninja. I'm like, no, you don't. You really don't want to be a ninja. They finished in 1868. It was a military position, and when the samurai fell, the ninja fell. It was absolutely. However, and if you do any of it, you'll be arrested. Animal cruelty, burning down houses, poisoning people. Generally, so for example, if you want to get into another village, if you like, but they've got checkpoints, you take 10 members through, you're all in a pilgrimage, you stamp your stuff, then you murder a local, and then you replace their body with, you say it's one of my friends has died, and that person replaces the other person in the enemy village. So you can't do these things in reality. However, that being said, without doubt, I think the way of the ninja or the way of the shinobi is something we can all benefit from. Now, the reason for this is A, getting out in the wilderness, getting out far, climbing, exercise, enjoying. So there's the physical aspects, but in truth, I would say it's more the mental aspects. So a ninja, their job, wholly, if you boil it all the way down, is to check for deception. So it's to identify truth and identify falsehood. And they also have to present a falsehood, but pretend it is the truth. And the idea is two shinobi or two ninja going against each other have to do that and work out what's going on behind enemy lines. Now, to do that, there's a vast collection of skills to identify the truth. So when you actually study ninjutsu, it makes your mind recalculate everything. You rebuild it. It's like tearing it down and rebuilding it, and then you start to see the world in a totally different way. So I'd say for everyone, yes, it's fun to get out there. Yes, it's fun to go and do the physical side, but it makes you see the world in a different way. And when you've finished it, everything seems much richer and much better. What, in fact, as I say, the biggest misunderstanding of ninjutsu is that it is a martial art. Now, I always change the word martial art because it gets ambiguous. What I mean is, it is not a specific form of hand-to-hand combat. This is one of my main focuses, is the world as we know it think that ninjas did a very specific type of fighting. That's not true. I'd say they were Japanese warriors, they were based in the samurai system, or they were foot soldiers, which are called ashigaru. Now, in the 1500s, they would have been brought up by their uncles, their fathers, their cousins, their brothers, and they would study their own family martial arts, and it was nothing to do with ninjutsu. It is nothing to do with it. Even later on, they would study different sword schools, different Japanese jiu-jitsu schools, but that has nothing to do with ninjutsu. Ninjutsu is an add-on. It's basically spying, infiltration, castle climbing, explosives, burnings, you know, that type of thing. And of course, psychology. So when people say, how do the ninjas fight in that? Not in any way, shape or form. They would never ever do it. But they would learn to fight. So it's the same as being in the army today. You wouldn't go into the special forces and have done no basic training. you would literally do your basic training, then learn those things. So if you want to talk about combat with the ninja, what they would do in a certain situation, for example, is set tripwires at doors. They would creep in at night, so you've got the first guy goes in, we talk about it in there, the first guy goes in, he's the main performer, and he'll creep in, he puts things like paper in his mouth, silent sandals, and he'll crawl all the way down, and he'll be listening for snoring. Now another person will go around the other side, and they'll strike a very small light, and they'll hold it up. The person on this side will check if everybody's asleep, or if it's a trap. If everybody's asleep, they'll go in, probably kill the first person or do whatever they need to do, steal what they need to steal, but then the alarm is raised, everybody starts getting their swords out and everybody's running out. What happens here is they will lock the doors, seal them, and they then have muskets and they'll fill it with gunpowder that's got arsenic, lead or any kind of poison. They shoot it through the window, everybody's coughing up blood, sort of vomiting, then they let them out and then they start chopping their heads off as they trip over tripwires. So when people say how do ninjas do martial arts, you're like, they don't do it in a ring and they don't do a specific form of punching.
Yeah.
So it's actually the opposite of that, because what they had is in the 1500s, they were in there from 1450 to 1600, you're in this real period of war in Japan. You've got to realise that before that period you've got princes, old bloodlines, and they're inside of like court life and they're trying to all represent the emperor, and power is lost. So in Japan everybody goes into turmoil, new people come out, new blood, and they start getting rid of old aristocratic families, so everybody's at war. And then from this rise the ninja. We need special forces guys. So they're not writing stuff down, they're not writing any scrolls down. We never find any in the historical record till about 1580, 1590. They're just not there, and the assumed idea is that they are just doing it and you're teaching and doing it as you go along. However, as 1600 comes, a guy called Tokugawa Ieyasu takes over all of Japan. He's very much a dictator, he's iron fist over Japan, it all stops. And he controls everything. And we see then the ninja decline, absolutely. If you look at the historical records, it says we hire 50 ninja, we hire 60 ninja, then 1620, 30, 1640, 10, and it just drops down. But what we see then is a rise in written scrolls. They're trying to preserve their ways. So actually it's reversed, and they are purposely writing it down so we can have it. And there's one man called Chikamatsu Shigenori who writes in the 1700s, and he says ninjutsu is almost lost. I am writing this, I am not going to be mysterious, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. Because really the secrets are about Shinto, Buddhism, that's what their secrets are. And actually in the 1600s war manuals were pushed out to say, hey look, and to make more money they started teaching people. Right. They are definitely writing with nostalgia, without doubt. One of the main things is that the payment of the ninja went down. So ninja in the main are from two, what you've got to understand is there's two classes. So in Japan you've got four classes of people. Yep, you've got warriors at the top, you've then got farmers, because farmers produce all the food. After that is craftsmen, they produce things for people to use, and the lowest of the low, the scum, are the merchants, the salespeople. And basically, but the merchants make most of the money. So you get this idea that at the top of the samurai level, you've got a samurai here and something called ashigaru, which is a foot soldier. So ninja pretty much come from either one of those two. So they're genuinely quite, not high in society, but they're not in the lower ranks. So this idea 1600 comes and suddenly they start losing money and their money gets smaller, everything gets smaller. So they start, you can see the complaining, just literally, there's so much complaining. In the old days we had as much gold as we wanted, the Lord, we could talk to the Lord. So ninjas used to go, literally speak to the Lord. He'd say, right, I need you to go out and do this. But then they got further and further and further away, they got lower in that. So we see constantly is we are not thieves, we are not scum, we are absolutely, we are samurai, but they're no longer samurai, if you know what I mean, but they're families. So some of the clans are allowed to carry swords, because what a lot of people don't realise in Japan is the idea of the samurai with two swords. Actually anybody could wear two swords before the 1590s, but it was only after that the samurai solidified this iron grip that they said no, only we wear them. And they disarm the peasants. So the ninja then drop in class and they actually are pushed out. So they say no. So they're allowed to wear a single sword and they're called koshi, warriors from the old families, and they drop down. So yes, absolutely. And then what else changes is that you get a lot of writings on Confucius. So before the 1600s, Japan is not big on Confucianism, but when the shogun takes over, he's like, right, everyone study Confucius. Why is that? Because know your place in society. So in a small level, Buddhism is about your understanding, your world, your life. Outside of that is Confucianism, which is the society you live in and how you work inside of that. And outside of that is Taoism, which is how you live in the universe. So that fluctuates and goes in and out. But by this time in the historical period, they just focus on this, and Confucius is the best. Know your place. So all you get is them complaining about that and lots of Confucian writings. So they have a nostalgia for that. Now from 1600 all the way to the 1990s, you have a massive build-up of the ninja myth, and we have this nostalgia for going back to the old days when everybody did everything brilliantly. But it is a little bit of a myth-making exercise. The ninja basically is an icon, really, isn't it? And I've said this before, it's James Bond. He's a commando and he's a spy. So everybody loves a bit of special forces, but everybody also loves a spy thriller. But when you combine the two, you get James Bond. And when you put an icon on top of it, or an iconography, it's perfect. So James Bond, if you see a tuxedo and you see a round white circle behind someone, it's James Bond. You all love him. If you see a guy in black with a throwing star, which is absolute myth and made up, we love him. So, however, if you go back to the original times, for 300 years, people hated the ninja. They disliked him. They thought they were scum of the earth.
Was this the samurai family?
Yeah, the samurai.
So did they put a kind of like a spin on to keep them down? You know, was there kind of like a class war thing going on?
Well, so as you know, is the samurai are doing this. So you've got in your army, you've got lots of people. You've got lancers, you've got bowmen, you've got musketeers, and everything. It all fits in, and you've got ninja on this thread. And in the warring periods, they're held as pretty high. In fact, we've got the documents. We're doing the Book of Samurai series, and we're just pulling out the second book now. And in there it says one of the highest achievements is acting as a ninja. But by 100 years later, they're like, I'm not doing that. They're horrible. They're terrible thieves and all this. Because again, you've got this idea that they go down, you know, in class. But what you get later on is a mixture between thievery and murder and robbery, and it changes into that, really. Right, you've just been saying that your mother said being a ninja was like being a grave digger, right? What you've got to realise in Japanese society is you get an outcast class. There's 4 classes, but actually there's 5. There's the outcasts, and those people dig graves. And they deal with dead bodies, they butcher animals, because it wasn't really done so much in Japan, and they ferry away the dead, and nobody touches them. By the 1900s, they are not touched. So the world your mother grew up in was a world where and ninjas had declined so much that literally they were on the outskirts of society. And your mother is going to have been brought up in a post sort of 1950s, 1960s idea that the ninja in the films that she watched, because they were very famous, these guys were at the bottom. The truth actually is different. The truth is that samurai, standard samurai inside of your military force, they would do, so Bushido, we're going to move on to Bushido here, the way of the warrior. The way of the warrior is actually not what you think. It's twofold. You've got to get the name of your lord as high as possible. You do things in honour of your lord, and you do things in honour of your own family and your own ancestors. Now it doesn't matter what that is, as long as it improves the land, as long as it improves your status. And you've got to remember that samurai are land grabbers. They will literally go and push out territory, and the better you do at war, you take a head, you take it back, you get more cash for it. It's more cash, the better the head. So you've got this idea that they expand and expand. So people don't realise that actually Bushido is about doing some quite foul things and quite foul deeds, but it's done in the name of the Lord. But what they couldn't stand, and what is absolutely true in samurai, is lying. You don't lie, you don't thieve, you don't trick people. It's okay to murder people in the night as long as you do it in the name of the Lord. Not a problem, but you never trick anyone and you never steal their money. In fact, samurai didn't like to touch money. They were like, we don't do that, we're samurai. Whereas ninja had to pretend to be that. So a ninja is basically a thief in the samurai world, and he has to go in. I don't know if you remember it in there, we talked about it's a single, inside of your body or inside of your ideas, you've got a solid core. Now a samurai has a solid core and a solid external, and he says, I'm samurai, I will just defeat you and I will do it in the name of the Lord. A thief or somebody who's bad has a really twisted core and a twisted body. They'll nick things off you and they don't care, they'll spit at you and the lot. A ninja has to have a samurai internal with a thief's core. So when you say to someone, go and do this job, proper samurai are like, you are joking, I am not doing that. And it was only a very specific type of person that could do it. So, and lastly, inside of that is the Book of Samurai series tells us, which is Isui Sensei, is from the 1600s, and he says, if you do something good and it's positive for the clan, then it was the Lord's idea. If you do something bad and you have to do something terrible, it's underhanded and sneaky, it's your idea. Right, about the training of the ninja, what we don't have is we don't have a step-by-step guide about how to do specific things. But what we do is have a glimpse into their world. So for example, they say about memory mapping. And the idea is that when you need to remember something, it happens very often now in modern, you know, magicians and things like that. He says what you have to do is think of the street that you grew up on. And you know, Mrs. Jones lives here, Mrs. Thingy lives there, and you do it. And what you do is you create a story with it, but it has to be an outrageous story. So you say, okay, Mrs. Jones met a massive monster called Joseph in the East, and then they travelled with Mrs. and something, and what they do is they apply those memories, so that monster will be represented and they'll think of a memory hook to make that one of the enemy's names. So there's lots of plays on words in Japanese, and what they do is they memorize all the buildings in their street, and they go through this story and through this story, and each person is a memory hook. And the idea is that they can never be caught with anything written on them. If you get caught with something written, like, oh, I'm writing down the enemy stuff, so it's about memory tricks, and they have to keep pushing it and then come back and report everything to the Lord. Or if it's too much, they'll write encoded messages. There's also one thing where it says they would learn how to do facial gestures with each other and talk inside of a conversation where only they would know what they're saying with facial gestures, even though they have to maintain a solid conversation outside of that.
I love that.
Actually, the one that you just spoke about, the trick of conversation between yourself, is actually impressive. And I think if you put it in context, it shows you just how dangerous their job was, or how on the ball they were. So what he's called, the guy who wrote Book of Ninja is called Fujibayashi Sensei, and he was writing in the 1600s. And he says that, first of all, a good ninja is never famous. Even though some ninjas were famous in their times for their exploits, says actually you should never be famous, otherwise what's the point of being a ninja? But he also says what they do is they have, each ninja school has very much a similar way of saying this concept, and the idea is dark within light or light within dark. So we all know the yin-yang and the yin-yo theory, and the idea is that when you infiltrate, first of all you infiltrate in the light, which means you're in disguise. So you walk up, you get through the gate with passes, you're chatting and you get inside, but then you turn it to the opposite, which is yin and dark, and that's where you go off into a corner, you creep underneath, crime, because these castles are like 2 miles long, some of them. You get a central keep, but you forget some of the outer circles were massive and go across entire cities, even in Japan today. So the idea is you get through one area, wait for nightfall, creep in, go down. Then again, they will actually at night, well, sometimes what they do is go and give orders to people, and the person's like, oh, who's that? I can't see him in the dark, he must be a captain, I better go do it. Then they crack on, then they'll go back to dark, and then when they're in the closest place where there's no way they could get away with being out in the open, this is where we're talking about, they do the false conversation. So if they knock something or something goes wrong, they're like, who's that? They'll have a conversation like, I think he's heard us. Are you sure? Yeah. I'll tell you what, make your way round, let's go, it's too dangerous. And they say let's go, and the point is you think they would flee because they've been discovered, but actually what they do is send the guards to the escape route and they go deeper. So it actually gets less guards over the Lord, and they've got less people to get through. So it's actually, and if they get caught, the punishments in Japan are horrific, so they would be absolutely tortured and killed. However, though, I say that, there is a way out of it. What the ninja would do is in their jacket, there's different ways. So Fujibayashi Sensei, it says in your jacket you put a false letter about a traitor. So I will say, so Fiona's in the crowd there. So I know Fiona is one of the top generals of the enemy. I've crept in, you two guys are going to capture me. Inside here I say, right, before you torture me, let me unhook this. I get a knife, take it out and say, Fiona's actually working for us, and I will dobber in for this. And Fiona's one of your best tacticians. Now you're all like looking at Fiona going, what? There's no way I could have known I was going to be captured. So we cut her head off. Everything's happy. You offer me more money, which is one of Sun Tzu's spies, which is the converted spy. Then I go back to my lord, and then you expect me to do something, but you have to then get oaths out of me and possibly try and find out where my family are, and then it becomes the cat and mouse double spy game. And sorry, the other guy, which is Book of Sack, which is Isui Sensei, he says if you're going to infiltrate a house, take a love letter with you. Because if you get caught, you just say, oh, I fancy that maid, she's really fit, and I just wanted to give her a love letter. And the difference is you'll probably get a good beating and thrown out the door as opposed to being executed.
Brilliant.
Crack on! Right. So, the connection with the stars and the heavens. So, this is called Tendo, which is the way of heaven. And a lot of this is based on astrology and esoteric dates. So, there's a couple of ways to go about this. First of all, we've got the 5 elements theory. And this is, you know, the different Chinese 5 elements. And if you set off on a ninja mission on a certain day, you've got to be in the correct cycle of generation. And you've got to be not in a cycle of destruction. The direction you go, the time you go, everything is based on where the heavens are. So the ninja are looking up, everybody in Japan is looking up and making sure they fit in with the constellations. However, fundamentally, you have to learn about the moon phases. You have to say you never infiltrate when it's light. This is it. Don't get me wrong, they would have to sometimes, but they say you always infiltrate when the moon is half dark and it's going darker and darker and darker until it gets half light. And then when it starts getting half lighter, oh sorry, from light to full moon, don't go in. It's too light, you can't do it. So they have to track the moon and pick the best day to go in. However, what that means is it's pitch black. It's absolutely pitch black. So what they have is certain different types of steps. So for example, saguriashi, which means to probe. So when a ninja walks forward, he'll probe his feet. It's just in case he doesn't go over something or move canes like that. However, the stars are still there. So if he's moving through enemy territory, he's got to be well aware of how to navigate by the stars, which today is normal, you know, survival techniques, and you know we do that. They also invented one of the, maybe not the first, but one of the early compasses. So they would use metal, they would magnetize it, and they would float it in a pot because they've got to get in the darkness that way. And as we said, basically he says put a map of the stars on your bedroom window and make sure you study it every day until you can get it and be a ninja. One is you're born into a ninja family. The second is that you are good enough and you are taken into a school and they teach you. So they must have took them to the side and trained them how to do it. So what they don't, because they knew that, what they don't say is exactly how it happened. They just tell you the skills. So for example, there's not for ninja but for samurai, it's called the tradition of the hawk. And when a samurai needs to learn how to kill and he's a bit young, what the banner on a samurai's back tells them exactly who they are on the battlefield. So what they do is the experienced, grizzled older man with his scars will take his banner off and take the young kid out and say, and he's the hawk teaching the young hawk. And what they do is they go out, they make a kill, they'll take the head off, and the old man gives it to him and says, go on, you have it son, enjoy your day. So he goes back, takes it and says, look, I've done the kill. And bit by bit they do that till he's got enough confidence. So it would be father to son, uncle, brothers, things like that. Yeah? It's brutal. No, it's brutal. I promise you, it's a horrible life. We don't know why Watkins publishes this. Don't get me wrong, it's not that they were horrible, horrible people, but they lived in a horrible, horrible world. What they said is, you may have heard the old Chinese idea that when, you must have heard Bruce Lee, he says it all, it's in the famous quote, you put water in a teapot, it becomes a teapot. You put water in a cup, it becomes a cup. The actual teaching is ancient Chinese, it moves over to Japan, and what it means is that when you are inside of society, you will adjust to society. So for a ninja, what they say is that, so for a samurai, it says, pick your friends carefully, because whoever your friends are, it will reflect on you. Isui Sensei actually says it's the same as a red room, painted red. If you brush up against it, you're always going to be covered in paint. But, so they say, stay away from anybody bad. However, for ninja, they say you've got to go and chat to bad people. So remember, when the water goes in the jar, that's your brain. You're going to go and knock around with thieves, killers, all that. Keep it straight inside. So they may be horrible, but they're trying to keep this samurai mind inside.